USPS lost my passport before my flight, but I made them pay for the entire trip. I still remember that sickening feeling in my stomach when I realized my passport was gone. 3 days before my flight to Paris, and the little blue booklet that was supposed to be safely delivered by USPS was nowhere to be found. It had started routinely enough. After months of planning my dream European vacation, saving every extra dollar from my graphic design job in Chicago, researching affordable accommodations, and plotting my itinerary, I'd realized my passport was expiring soon. 6 weeks before departure, I'd rushed to submit my renewal application, paying for expedited processing and return shipping. The online tracker showed it had been processed and shipped back. Delivered, the tracking update read. But there was no package at my Logan Square apartment door, no notice, nothing in my mailbox. I called the post office immediately. "These things happen sometimes," said the disinterested voice on the other end. "File a missing mail search request. Online." I did. I also physically went to my local branch on Kedzie Avenue, where I was met with shrugs and suggestions to check with your neighbors. I knocked on doors. I searched trash bins. Nothing. "Maybe you should postpone your trip," my mother suggested when I called her in panic. "You can't go to Europe without a passport." The thought made my chest tight. This wasn't just any vacation. It was the first real international trip I'd ever saved for. 3 countries in 2 weeks: France, Italy, and Spain. Train tickets purchased, accommodations booked, time off work approved, non-refundable deposits paid. "I'm not postponing anything," I said, more to myself than to her. That night I barely slept. I kept thinking about the $3,000 I'd meticulously saved over 18 months that would go down the drain. The vacation days I'd carefully accumulated. The dream I'd had since college of seeing the Louvre, eating real pasta in Rome, watching the sunset in Barcelona. In the morning, I made coffee and mapped out a plan of action. This wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. I didn't know much about how USPS handled lost mail claims, but I was about to become an expert. Armed with my tracking number and a determination that surprised even me, I started documenting everything. My first stop was the main post office downtown. The lines were long, but I wasn't leaving without answers. "Your package shows as delivered," the postal worker said after typing in my tracking number. "There's nothing more we can do." "That's not acceptable," I replied, surprising myself with my firmness. "I need to speak with a supervisor." The supervisor, a woman named Diane with graying hair and tired eyes, initially gave me the same response, but I came prepared. "I've researched USPS regulations," I said, pulling out printed documents. "According to your own policies, USPS is responsible for items lost in transit. The GPS data should show exactly where the carrier scanned it as delivered." Diane looked at me differently then. "Let me check something." She disappeared into a back office and returned 20 minutes later. The carrier scanned it as delivered, but the GPS location shows it was scanned at an address 3 blocks from yours. My heart jumped. "So USPS delivered my passport to the wrong address?" "It appears so," she admitted. I pulled out my phone and showed her screenshots of the non-refundable bookings. "My flight leaves in 2 days. This mistake is going to cost me thousands." She gave me a form for an official claim and the name of her regional manager. "File this immediately," she said quietly, "and document everything." That afternoon, I called the State Department's emergency passport services. The next available appointment was in 3 weeks. "I have a misdelivered passport situation," I explained. "USPS has admitted fault." The representative was sympathetic but firm. "Even with proof of USPS error, we can't guarantee an emergency appointment before your flight." I hung up and felt tears welling. Then anger replaced despair. This wasn't my mistake. I had done everything right. I spent the next hours researching federal regulations governing mail misdelivery. I found cases where USPS had been held financially responsible. I drafted a formal letter detailing the situation, citing relevant postal regulations, and documenting my financial losses. If my passport cannot be recovered, and I miss my trip due to USPS error, I will be seeking full compensation for all non-refundable expenses, I wrote, attaching copies of receipts totaling $3,226. I sent the letter via certified mail to the Postmaster General's office, the Consumer Affairs Division, and the regional manager Diane had mentioned. I also filed a complaint with the Postal Inspection Service. That night I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Robert Jennings from USPS Consumer Affairs," a voice said. "We've received your complaint. This situation has been escalated to our executive resolution team." The day before my flight, I still had no passport and no solution. I'd packed my suitcase anyway, unable to accept defeat. My phone rang at 7:43 a.m. "This is Lisa Chen from the USPS Executive Resolution Team," said a crisp, professional voice. "I'm calling about your passport situation." My heart raced. "Have you found it?" "No," she said, "but we've confirmed carrier error. I've been authorized to discuss compensation options." I sat down. "I'm listening." "Normally we'd offer to cover the cost of the lost item and shipping fees," she explained. "But given the unique circumstances and the documentation you've provided, we're prepared to offer compensation for your trip expenses." I almost dropped the phone. "You mean USPS will reimburse your non-refundable expenses?" she confirmed. "In return, we ask that you sign a settlement agreement." I felt lightheaded. "But I still can't go on my trip without a passport." "That's the second reason I'm calling," Lisa continued. "We've been in contact with the State Department's Emergency Services Division. There's been a cancellation at the Chicago Passport Agency this morning. If you can get downtown within the hour with your documentation and proof of immediate travel, they can issue a same-day emergency passport." 2 hours later, I sat in the waiting area of the passport agency. Emergency application submitted, heart pounding. The expedited fee had been waived after the USPS representative had made calls explaining the situation. By 2 p.m., I held a new emergency passport in my hands. It was valid for 1 year, enough for my trip. That evening, a courier delivered an envelope containing a settlement agreement and a prepaid debit card loaded with $3,126, the exact amount of my documented expenses. I signed the agreement, packed the card, and finished my last-minute preparations. Against all odds, I would be boarding my flight to Paris the next day. As I zipped my suitcase closed, my phone dinged with an email. "We regret to inform you that your missing mail search has been closed without recovery of your item." I laughed out loud. For once, bureaucratic inefficiency had worked in my favor. The flight to Paris was long, but I barely noticed. I was still in disbelief that I was actually on my way. When the flight attendant came around with champagne, I splurged on a glass. To the United States Postal Service, I toasted silently, "Thanks for the trip." Landing at Charles de Gaulle Airport felt surreal. As I stepped out into the Parisian spring air, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The stress of the past week melted away as I navigated to my affordable but charming hotel in the 11th arrondissement. For the next 2 weeks, I lived my dream, but with an unexpected twist. The prepaid card from USPS had covered all my pre-booked expenses, flights, trains, accommodations. That meant the money I'd saved could now be spent on experiences I'd originally planned to skip. In Paris, instead of just viewing the Louvre from outside, I spent a full day wandering its halls. I took a cooking class in Montmartre, where I learned to make proper croissants from a French chef who barely spoke English but communicated through the universal language of butter and flour. In Rome, I upgraded from my hostel to a small but elegant hotel near the Spanish Steps. I took a day trip to Pompeii I hadn't planned to afford. I ate at restaurants where locals dined instead of the tourist traps I'd budgeted for. In Barcelona, I splurged on a sunset sailing trip along the Mediterranean coast. As I watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected off the water, I thought about how differently this trip could have gone. Each time I swiped the USPS-funded card, I felt a small thrill of satisfaction. This wasn't just compensation, it was justice. A government agency had made a mistake, owned it, and made it right. On my last night in Europe, sitting at a small tapas bar in Barcelona's Gothic quarter, I pulled out my phone and composed an email to Lisa Chen at USPS. "I wanted to thank you and your team for turning what could have been a disaster into the trip of a lifetime," I wrote. I attached a photo of myself smiling in front of the Sagrada Familia. Sometimes the journey matters more than the destination. In this case, the obstacle became the way. I didn't expect a reply, but one came the next morning as I was packing to return home. "Thank you for your email," Lisa wrote. "I'm sharing this with our team. It's rare we get to see positive outcomes from difficult situations. Safe travels home." On the flight back to Chicago, I scrolled through my photos. Nearly 1,000 memories I might never have made if my passport hadn't gone missing. The Eiffel Tower at night, the Colosseum at dawn, new friends from a walking tour in Barcelona. Sometimes the worst travel disasters lead to the best stories, and sometimes, just sometimes, the system actually works. As for my lost passport, it never did turn up, but I didn't care anymore. That little blue book had disappeared, but in its place, I'd gotten something far more valuable, the knowledge that standing up for yourself can actually work, that bureaucracies can sometimes be forced to do the right thing, and that sometimes, just sometimes, justice doesn't just prevail, it pays. For your vacation. When I tell people this story, they rarely believe me. That's okay. I have the memories, the photos, and the knowledge that the next time something goes wrong, it's worth fighting for what's right. And somewhere in Chicago, there's a postal carrier who probably got a serious talking to about double-checking addresses. I hope they learned their lesson. I certainly learned mine. When life gives you lemons, make lemonade. And when USPS loses your passport, make them pay for your European vacation.